Tonight we're going to be presenting to you about migrant ministries that the UCS, the United States Central and Southern Province, has. There's two big ones that are right along the Texas border. One in El Paso that Rafael Garcia runs and will speak about, and then one down in Brownsville, which is on the southern edge. So one is on the east southern coast of Texas, and then the other side is El Paso, which is on the far west side. I'm going to talk first about what we're doing in Brownsville, and then Rafa will be able to talk about his ministry. And these should complement each other because in one place, down in Brownsville, the Jesuits are going across the border and visiting people in Mexico primarily, whereas in El Paso, we're receiving people primarily. So about 3 years ago, the provincial of the UCS province, Tom Green, was approached by Bishop Daniel Flores. This is kind of a normal thing. A bishop will approach the Jesuits and ask us to help with something. And Bishop Flores asked us to help somehow serve the migrant community at the border. He didn't really even know exactly what he wanted us to do. He just wanted Jesuits to come and figure it out and see what the needs were when they got there. And so he invited us down. So the provincial went and spoke to the two newly ordained Jesuits, Brian Strasburger and Louis Hotop. Brian had spent years studying migration. He speaks Spanish. He did his regency work in Nicaragua. So this was perfect and right up his alley. Louis had spent the last 12 years forming himself to be a missionary in Russia. Both of them were sent together to the border. So Louis spent 3 months learning how to speak Spanish before arriving in Brownsville. And when they got there, they did just as the bishop had invited them to do. And this is something we're actually, just as an interesting side note, the person that pays for this primarily is the Diocese of Brownsville. The bishop actually pays a salary to each of the Jesuits that are there, and there are 3 Jesuits there full time. When they got down there, as the bishop said, they just listened and paid attention to what the needs were. And what they would do is visit migrant camps. And what they found was most lacking in the migrant camps was care for their spiritual needs. And so what they do every day now, 3 years later, is that they go into the migrant camps, whether on the Mexico side and then sometimes also visiting shelters on the U.S. side, and also regularly visiting shelters on the U.S. side, and they celebrate the Mass. That is the primary ministry that they have, is they go into these shelters and they celebrate the Mass. I had a chance to visit them, and it's kind of an incredible experience because it begins in absolute chaos, and I'm going to show you some photos of what it looks like when you get to a migrant camp that might have 1,000 people in it, and they're set up in these tent city that's behind you, and there's this one big tent where they'll set up for the liturgy, and you begin, and there's like 20 people, and as it goes on, more and more people show up until there might be 100-something people by the end of it, and they're just listening, and you can palpably feel a difference of peacefulness from the beginning of the liturgy to the end. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's like the sacraments had real power, and like it did, and you can just palpably feel a difference. And there's just a greater level of trust and kindness and generosity among people at the end of that. They do tons of other stuff. They bless rosaries. They try to help a little bit with the material needs as well. They take donations to help with material needs. They try to connect people with resources. One of the things that I was surprised by and found interesting is that at the end of every liturgy, they make an announcement encouraging people to always try to enter the U.S. through the most a legal method or the closest thing to that. The way that this works now, again, this was all new for me, so I'm sharing it because I find it interesting, is that you download an app on your phone, CBP One. And every day you register on the app for an appointment with U.S. Customs and Immigration. Whatever it is that whatever reason you may be asking for asylum in the U.S., you register on the app. And every day, randomly, some people are admitted and given an appointment. That's usually 3 weeks later. And then you have to show up for that appointment a few weeks later. And so people are on this app, usually staying in a migrant shelter either just across the border or further south, hoping to get an actual appointment with U.S. Customs and Immigration. The wait for an appointment right now, it was somewhere around 4 months, I think. I think it was somewhere around 4 months usually. And I think they do the random lottery system so that there's a chance you could get it any day, encouraging people to try to enter legally and to use the app to get the appointment. That wait might have gotten longer with some of the recent changes when the Biden administration limited it to 2,500 per day. That apparently dramatically changed some of the ministry they were doing on the border. I'm going to show you a few photos of what they do, but generally the description is they go into these camps and they celebrate masses. Let me go down. There were a few interesting things. Well, there's a few extra interesting things I'll add afterwards. So they were able to do some baptisms, and they have been able to do some baptisms. One of the shelters in Mexico, I went down to visit and just to get to know it, because sometimes we might send discerners down there for a visit. So just to get to know what it was like, I went and visited with them. And this particular shelter that they were at is by far the safest and the nicest one. It's run by religious sisters. The shelters are a safe haven. Outside of the shelters, to be in Reynosa or not Piedras Negras, that's an Eagle Pass. It's Reynosa or Matamoros. There's the two shelters that they visit, both of which are near Brownsville and McAllen, respectively. It's pretty dangerous outside of the shelter. And even the Jesuits know that the cartels are aware that they're going in and out. And there have been places where they used to visit that they don't visit because it was dangerous to visit. Plus, there's a lot of unexpected things. There have been migrant camps that kind of were set up, might have had several hundred people in them, and then the government came in the middle of the night and plowed over the shelters, and everybody had to disperse and move somewhere else. Currently, there are a couple pretty stable shelters that they visit, or 2 or 3 very stable shelters that are run by evangelicals, except for this one that's run by the religious sisters, which is the safest one, and they facilitated baptisms because people stay there for long enough that you can do the prep and everything. So Louis Hotop's the tall one in the back. Brian Strasburger is the current director of the work. He's on the right with the beard. And then, I don't know if any of you know Flavio Bravo. He was in Puerto Rico, San Juan for a little while, and Houston for a while, and now he's helping out down there at the border. This is blessing people at the end of the Mass. They often would give out rosaries that people would bring forward for a blessing or just asking for prayer. Again, giving a blessing. People coming up in line for blessings. The migrants are from all over Latin America. They begin every Mass with the same kind of bit, and it works every single time, which is just to say, who here's from Nicaragua? Who here's from El Salvador? Who here's from Honduras? And people kind of cheer and chant, and they usually say Venezuela for the last one because Venezuela always has the biggest response and the biggest crowd, at least with the ones while I was there. There are a lot of Haitian migrants as well, so they'll read the gospel. They'll have a Haitian migrant read the gospel in Creole before they do the homily, usually. This building here, so this is the shelter in Reynosa, or Matamoros. This is a big tent. To the right of this, there's a picture of kind of the tent city. It used to be a hospital. It's no longer being used as a hospital, and the Mexican government opened it up as a migrant shelter. And so this is the tent where they do this big Mass. You can see the porta potties in the back lined up, just kind of what conditions are like. It's very difficult. You're wall-to-wall in tents with other people. This is that same tent shelter just during the Mass, what it looks like, a little pop-up kind of table you set up. Speaking to one of the migrants. That's what the tent city looks like. That's not the same place, but it's one tent next to another, and you have a whole family living inside of a tent. That particular shelter, hold on, that's to remind me not to stay up on my computer all night. This is a wonderful feature to get you to stop using your computer late at night. Give it a second. It always works. Okay. This is just what the tents look like when they have these set up. And again, somebody could be living in these for 3+ months with a family. And there's food that's brought and distributed. Yeah, it's safer to be in here and in this tent, in this closed area, though, than outside of it. One of the things that I was surprised to learn about while I was there is that it's very common today for people to be kidnapped as they approach the border. That seems frozen up. So there's a lot of families. I met a big Cuban family that was recovering from this. They had just gotten out. A lot of the cartels are kidnapping the migrants, and depending what country you're from, they'll charge a certain amount. So Cubans actually usually have a higher amount because they presume they have family here in the United States and they can pay more. But we met a lot of people. It was a surprising and significant percentage that are kidnapped. And the way that it works sometimes, and there's a video if you go to the website for Del Camino Ministries that I'm getting these pictures from, but there's a video where a family says that police stopped a bus and got on the bus and asked to see everyone's documents, and it turns out it was just a cartel, and they were just taking out every migrant from the bus. And then they imprison them and demand a fee for it. This particular family was a husband, wife, and 2 children, and after the fee was paid, they got the money for the wife and the 2 children, and the cartel said, for you to get out, we need extra. And they made them pay up even extra. And so it's just cartels taking advantage of some of the most human beings, some of the most vulnerable people in the world. I'm going to stop with that and pass it over so you can talk. No, I'm not going to use the video. I've talked about it all. And I'm instead going to pass it over. Yeah, this will work. Unless my internet. Oh, good, it's going to work. It'll work. Okay. I'll help with the video when you need it.
Bueno, buenas noches a todos. We're going to do this bilingual, así que me toca en español ahora. Yo creo que la otra vez que estuve aquí le hablé algo sobre el albergue, ¿no? Abrimos el albergue en la parroquia Sagrado Corazón, que es la parroquia jesuita fundada por los jesuitas desde 1893. Siempre ha atendido a personas migrantes, especialmente de México. Últimamente ha habido un flujo muy grande en la zona del Paso en los últimos 2 años de Venezuela. Entonces fue el flujo venezolano lo que como Dios nos tocó el corazón para decir, hace falta abrir un albergue aquí, porque todos los albergues de la ciudad estaban ya saturados, porque había gente viniendo de Centroamérica, pero el flujo grande en diciembre de 2022 fue de Venezuela. Entonces había gente por la calle, era invierno, había frío, entonces fue cuando decidimos nosotros abrir un albergue sin preparación y sin nada, básicamente, excepto con fe y deseo de hacer algo por la gente necesitada, ¿no? Entonces, a ver cómo tú me ayudas aquí. ¿Cómo puedo poner esto en grande para que sea todo? Le voy a pedir un video que salió. Esto fue una de las muchas, la prensa estaba ahí constantemente y eso nos ayudó porque a través del media que tuvimos nacionalmente, internacionalmente, recibimos muchas donaciones para funcionar por varios meses. Últimamente tenemos ahora fondos de FEMA, del gobierno, para los gastos, pero los primeros 6, 8 meses fueron gracias a donaciones de personas privadas, de personas, organizaciones, grants, y verdaderamente es una gran misión para nosotros, dado el lugar donde estamos estratégicamente en la frontera, del lado cruzando Ciudad Juárez, ahí cruzando la frontera, a 3 cuadras está nuestra parroquia. Entonces, ¿y qué pasó aquí?
For the first time tonight, CBS 4 On Your Side is getting a look inside Sacred Heart Church, where migrants are again showing up in large numbers with 3 weeks to go before Title 42 is lifted. CBS 410's Jonathan Mejia is live in South Central El Paso with exclusive footage showing the challenge the church is facing in the days leading up to the dramatic change in border practices. Jonathan.
Sacred Heart Church has become the epicenter for migrants that have made their way here to El Paso, and despite other options for migrants to find shelter across the city, they still choose to come here to Sacred Heart Church, even if that means having to spend the night outside like this group of migrants that are already bundled up as the night progresses, because the space inside Sacred Heart Church has already reached capacity. Now today, I got exclusive inside access to the shelter. It is dinner time inside Sacred Heart Church. Father Rafael Garcia says they will not turn anyone away despite limitations. Currently, they are well over their capacity of 120.
Well, basically, we just are serving people that just come to us. We're not part of any other feeder system at this point. People just come.
Sacred Heart Church is completely self-funded. They receive private donations, and thanks to the national attention the last migrant surge brought to Sacred Heart, Father Garcia says help has poured in from all over the country. But funds and resources are running low just weeks before Title 42 is lifted on May 11th.
We're concerned about how much we can continue. We will do what we can according to our capacity.
Inside the shelter, there are migrants that have entered the country legally through the CBP One app, and others who were released after turning themselves over to Border Patrol along the border highway. Lucero Leon is one of those migrants who turned herself in along with her 3 children.
De verdad que fue demasiado riesgoso.
She says it was a risky decision to turn herself in, but she had faith and the desire to get to the United States for the betterment of her children. The same motivation pushed Androsen Herrera to make the journey from Venezuela.
Tanta lucha que uno tenía en el camino.
He says it wasn't easy. His daughter got sick on the way. And although he met good people, he says he also came across bad people, a risk he was willing to take to get to the United States. And while the situation can be overwhelming for Sacred Heart Church, Father Garcia says he feels fulfilled to help out those in need.
We're very happy to do this, but it's a lot of work and it needs a lot of resources, so we welcome any assistance we can get.
Sacred Heart Church is completely self-contained. They fund themselves and are in need of donations. If you're willing to help, you can look for this story on our website at cbs4local.com. I'm live in Segundo Barrio. Jonathan Mejia, CBS 4 at 10.
Entonces, brevemente, nuestro ministerio es dar, podemos decir, asistencia en cuerpo, mente y espíritu. Tenemos un albergue, hay 3 comidas al día, hay lugar para dormir. No es lo más, vamos a decir, práctico. Tenemos que usar el mismo espacio del gimnasio para todo, comedor, quitar las mesas para dormir por la noche en el piso con colchas, mats. Entonces, también tenemos la Jesuit Refugee Services, colabora con nosotros, la oficina de ellos del Paso, para algún tipo de acompañamiento psicológico. Tenemos una psicóloga que trabaja con nosotros en el albergue, trabaja full time con nosotros. Y también todas las noches, cuando estoy allá, todas las noches yo paso a hacer una oración. La gente es impresionante la fe que tienen. Venezolanos hay muchos que no son católicos, pero son cristianos. Es curioso, todo lo de Venezuela parecido un poco a lo de Cuba, también con lo de la Iglesia Católica. Pero gente de mucha fe, sin duda, se han arriesgado. Podía ser la historia, que eso ustedes saben, todo lo que pasa a la gente cruzando el Darién, por el Panamá, por México. Siempre dicen que es la peor parte, donde están los crímenes organizados, los secuestros, extorsiones, violaciones de las mujeres y hombres y todo. Entonces, cuando llegan ahí, pues por lo menos ya tienen un lugar seguro. Y también, así que espiritualmente yo paso todos los días a hacer una oración, peticiones de la gente. Los invitamos a los que quieran ir a misa el domingo, la iglesia está al lado mismo. Así que eso básicamente es lo que hacemos. Hemos estado alrededor de promedio a 125 personas diarias que servimos. Algunos regresan porque no tienen su salida hasta los 2 días o 3 días. Y ahora últimamente con lo que acaba de hacer el presidente Biden de cerrar las puertas donde el Border Patrol estaba dejando pasar gente procesada, no eran indocumentados, procesada por Border Patrol. Eso lo han cerrado por el momento por razones políticas también. Entonces ahora el número de nosotros ha bajado. Últimamente hemos estado teniendo 40, 30 por la noche, 25 anoche, en vez de 100. Así que no se sabe, muchas de estas cosas están un poco en la mano de la política, pero como lo vemos nosotros, como lo veo yo, es que nosotros vamos más allá de la política, somos iglesia, estos son hijos e hijas de Dios, son necesitados, son personas humanas. La última cosa que iba a decir, la familia que ustedes vieron al final, la señora que estaba ahí con las 3 hijos, ella es de Perú, el esposo es de Venezuela, y ellos fueron de los que decidieron quedarse en El Paso. Se les consiguió un apartamento, de hecho a 2 cuadras de la iglesia. Ahora son parroquianos. Ella empezó a ser voluntaria en el albergue. Los 2 tienen ya permiso de trabajo para trabajar. Los hijos están en catecismo. Una de las hijas se acaba de bautizar. Así que como que ese ha sido un ejemplo de un success story localmente con nosotros, una familia que recibimos sin nada, la que ustedes vieron ahí al final, y ahora están integradas con nosotros. Así que en eso estamos, una de las misiones principales ahora de nuestra parroquia. Así que no sé si ustedes tienen preguntas para mí o para Juan Pablo.
Sí, yo tengo una. Bueno, sí,
Juan Pablo, carga.
gracias. Primero, gracias a Dios y aplaudo el esfuerzo de ustedes y otras personas de buena fe que están colaborando en todos estos esfuerzos donde hay una gran necesidad. Eso primero. Pero pareciera que el problema o la situación de la migración tiene un escenario de forma y otro de fondo. El de forma es que se necesitan fondos, obviamente, para poder mantener esta buena labor que ustedes y otros están haciendo en beneficio de los más pobres. El tema de fondo, que es al que quería llegar, porque pues aquí vemos varias personas que compartimos la fe, que compartimos el deseo de crear un mundo con mejor calidad de vida. Entonces el tema de fondo es qué pudiéramos nosotros hacer acá, especialmente ahora que vienen tiempos de elecciones, y no es hagan esto, sino sugerencias, cuáles son sus opiniones de qué pudiéramos hacer nosotros para mejorar el tema de fondo, para que esta situación sea más...
Bueno, yo diría dos cosas. Primero, el origen del problema es en los países de origen, porque hay corrupción, hay violencia, hay pobreza estructurada, hay todo tipo de problemas estructurales que es lo que se llama la migración forzada. O sea, la mayoría de estas personas, cuando yo hablo con ellos no querían venir a Estados Unidos. Fueron forzados a migrar por distintas circunstancias, Centroamérica especialmente, secuestro de los hijos, si no pagan a las pandillas, el crimen organizado le mata a un hijo. Entonces la gente está forzada a migrar. Así que eso no nos toca quizás a nosotros, pero indirectamente lo que se puede hacer para mejorar la situación en el país de origen, ahí está la solución más a largo plazo. La otra cosa es cambiar la narrativa. Cambiar la narrativa. Si lo puedo repetir varias veces, cambiar la narrativa. Lo que ustedes oyen en la prensa constantemente es, están llegando por las fronteras criminales, terroristas, personas que quieren robar. Y no es cierto. La mayoría de las personas que nosotros tratamos, primero que nada, ya son procesadas por el gobierno, ya le han hecho un background check y una serie de cosas. Pero además son gente que están buscando, como la mayoría de nosotros cuando salimos de Cuba, una vida mejor, buscar trabajo. En Venezuela la situación está terrible, como ustedes saben, pero igual en Centroamérica. Así que hay que cambiar la narrativa, decir estos son criminales que vienen a quitar el trabajo a la gente, que vienen a hacer daño. Un jesuita que está en mi comunidad, que trabajaba con Jesuit Refugee Services por 2 décadas, dice que históricamente y mundialmente siempre se le ponen a los migrantes, se le ponen 3 tags. ¿No? Son criminales, traen enfermedades y vienen a quitar los trabajos. Eso existe en la historia del mundo a través de los años, ¿no? Entonces el estigma contra el migrante muchas veces es muy fuerte y hay que reconocer que son personas humanas que están buscando una vida para su familia, que están en situación de vida o muerte, como María y José tuvieron que huir cuando le dijeron te vamos a matar al niño Jesús, Herodes está atrás de todos los niños. Cosas parecidas a eso están pasando si uno oye las historias. Así que podría hablar mucho, pero quiero decir que es una cosa seria y es una cosa que se ha politizado mucho y que al migrante muchas veces se le pone como negativo. Todo grupo humano va a tener gente que son criminales aquí en Estados Unidos, afuera, problemáticas, pero la mayoría de las personas son familias que están buscando sobrevivir. Esa sería mi respuesta a la pregunta.
Rafi, hablaste del problema dentro de los países, que sabemos que
Sí.
hay corrupción, comunismo, 40 cosas que están crimen dentro del país,
Sí,
está
sí.
descontrolado, que está afectando a esta familia. Recientemente hemos oído que hay, por ejemplo, en El Salvador, un movimiento nuevo que ha bajado mucho el crimen. ¿Han visto algún impacto de ese cambio en el gobierno y en la criminalidad en un país específico? ¿Han visto algún impacto sobre la inmigración de ese país?
No.
O sea, por ejemplo, dando el ejemplo de El Salvador.
Bueno, nosotros, el flujo de nosotros principalmente es Sudamérica, interesante. Nosotros somos Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, a veces algunos de Centroamérica. Hay muchos menores de edad de Sudamérica que están en centros de detención, que yo también visito. Muchos de Guatemala por la pobreza. Del Salvador lo que está pasando es, y digo, no tengo ahora, no puedo dar en detalle, pero sí hay un presidente que ha cortado el crimen porque ha metido a miles de personas en la cárcel sin juicio. Entonces ha sido también una cosa, es una dictadura que no se sabe qué va a pasar, cómo va a funcionar eso, ¿no? El hecho es que la persona promedio en Salvador, porque he hablado con gente, está contenta porque puedo salir a la calle y ya no hay violencia, porque están correctos en eso. Pero, ¿qué tipo de política es esa? ¿Cuál es el futuro de un tipo de gobierno como ese? Es peligroso porque la gente no tiene juicio, no están dando contabilidad en la parte monetaria. Entonces, como cualquier dictadura, pues pueden resolver problemas, pero tienen otros problemas, ¿no?
Pero tú sabes cómo es el impacto
En la migración no te puedo decir exactamente. Todavía vemos gente de El Salvador venir, pero no te puedo decir el número porque no es lo que manejamos nosotros.
Pero es curioso, ¿por qué tú le dices dictadura si fue a elecciones y ganó por Romney?
Dos veces.
Sí, yo sé. No, porque claro, si tú ofreces seguridad así, pero yo creo que nosotros, por lo menos como yo me veo, estamos llamados a hacer preguntas más profundas a veces, es a base de una dictadura.
Me parece que lo más importante es que han quitado el crimen de la calle, sacando a la gente que están delincuentes
Sí, no, sí.
en las gangas. Eso es las mismas gangas.
No, yo sé. Yo no me quiero meter en la política. Yo nada más te puedo decir que eso es lo que yo sé y es la realidad, ¿no?
Rafa,
I'm going to ask a question in English so that you can get my point across in English. You're about the point about like the family, but let's just not get into the politics stuff. Is there a way that you guys verify the children that are coming through your facility, that they are actually with their families and stuff? Are you guys focusing on children as well? Like,
No.
how do you make sure that the kids are okay? How are they safe? Because they are the most vulnerable.
Yeah, we don't take our shelter on the unaccompanied minors. The unaccompanied minors often happen because of many reasons. They either come alone or they come with an unqualified family member, which could be a cousin or an aunt that has raised them, and then they're separated. But we don't take out our shelter. That's a very different responsibility, and they're not handled even by the immigration department. They're handled by Health and Human Services.
Rafael, tengo una pregunta aquí. ¿Qué por ciento de las personas que tienen en el centro son cubanos?
Nosotros, en el albergue,
Sí.
de vez en cuando nos caen algunos cubanos. No muchos, pero nos han caído algunos cubanos. Igual que nos han caído de
¿Qué es lo
Brasil.
¿Por qué hay esa diferencia que en estos centros caen tan pocos cubanos cuando están viniendo miles de cubanos? Los cubanos tienen otra preferencia en el camino.
Yo no sé, hay muchas rutas para entrar en Estados Unidos. Hay muchas rutas y caminos. Pero nosotros, estoy hablando de mi experiencia en nuestro albergue, es el flujo venezolano principalmente. Y ecuatoriano y Colombia. Esos tres países. Juan, ¿tú quieres contestar algunas preguntas? Por si
Padre,
tienes
hablaste del problema en los países de donde vienen los inmigrantes, pero no hablaste del problema de la frontera abierta que tienen los Estados Unidos, que está fomentando y está invitando a todo tipo de individuos a venir. O sea, no hay control, se abrieron las fronteras desde el día 1, el señor Biden lo hizo él solo, no es Congreso ni nada. ¿Y ese no crees que es un problema?
Bueno, lo que yo... Contesta tú, sí.
Es posible que no entienda totalmente, así que es posible que a lo mejor yo no entienda exactamente qué significa frontera abierta con Biden, solo porque de lo que yo he visto, todos los migrantes que han entrado o entran por CBP-1, que técnicamente es legal, pero todavía es un proceso que dura 3 o 4 meses, o, y esto es lo que pasa muchas veces, cruzan ilegalmente, pero están brincando la verja. O sea, it's not like they're walking in. I mean, they're jumping a fence to get in that way. So I guess part of my question would be, what does an open border mean? Because there's Democrats and Republicans have both been, I mean, migration is a very complicated topic. What does that mean?
I can answer that. The fact that you can get in without having consequences. If you think that an app is going to have these guys report back 3 weeks from now, then we're a lot more naive than we're talking.
Yeah.
Are they coming back really to report after an app once
Okay.
they're home free?
So I'm going to name it to make sure that I'm on the same page, but I think I understand. So by open borders, understood that everybody who comes is admitted and is admitted into an asylum process that takes maybe 2 years to complete. And I would say and I would say that it's not uncommon. The only so part of the reason that the guys at the border encourage people to use the CBP-1 app is because it is, even though it's an extremely slim chance, it's the only chance they have at actually getting legal status in the United States. And it's a pretty slim chance for most of them because the requirements as they're defined for what would qualify you for asylum are pretty strict. So the truth is that what ends up happening is most people, I think, are bought about 2 years of time in the U.S. They're given a work visa. They're given the ability to legally be present here. And then at the end of that time, most end up getting a deportation order from the courts. So the open border, that makes sense to me in the sense of like everybody's given a chance in the country. And I think it's quite common, and this is why we have at least 11 million, and that's an old number, of kind of undocumented migrants in the U.S., of people that when it comes to the end of that term and they receive a deportation order, that's when they disappear, right? And they don't show up for the final, they don't turn themselves in for it. So yeah, so I don't know if that's, well, all that aside, yes, that's a real thing, and that happens all the time, I think, yeah.
Let me ask a question, and please forgive my. I'm sorry. Juan Carlos, let me ask you a question, and please forgive my blunt assessment of the issue. First of all, I totally agree that if you have an immigrant to help him, I have no doubts about that. It would be very unfortunate if I say something different than that, because most of us here were immigrants one way or another sometime in our lives. However, can you tell me another country in the world that has a situation like we do have with the border? Where they can, regardless of the procedures, they can bypass the procedures and come in the magnitude that they're coming to our country today? I think we have a unique, no, we don't. If you give me another country, please say so.
Well, I think it's complicated. Part of the reason that I do this, who else has so many? I mean, one is like Canada. Canada made a law recently, made it a rule recently that you have to do the safe third country, which is you can't pass through the U.S. and claim asylum in the U.S. and Canada without first claiming the U.S. And like, who's going to get to Canada any other way?
But you cannot have a country like Mexico will stop the Guatemalans coming up unless they make money with the cartel. Haitians are going to Dominican Republic as easy unless they pay the border frontier board, and things who are bypassing and corruption, which I agree is a main problem.
Yeah.
However, if we take away that, the opportunity that our country is giving to come is unique in this situation that we're having.
This is all being recorded.
All recorded.
I think part of the reason that I do the so-so thing is that the way that our political system for welcoming migrants or refugees doesn't work well. So Biden recently changed the rule to $2,500 per day and just capped it hard. What happened, $2,500 per day crossing the border legally. What happened is that tons of people immediately began crossing illegally because they just gave up hope that they would get an appointment. Now that flow, theoretically and probably, would diminish with time because the message would get passed down that like, look, it's not an open border. But the point I'm making is that I think that I would say that I think that there's probably a lot more jobs in need in the U.S. right now than our migration system legally allows in, if that makes sense.
I hear you, and I understand your point. However, regardless of the number of jobs out there, would you give that excuse you gave me to the people that's been waiting for years to have an appointment with the CBP because they're related to a U.S. citizen, because they're the brothers of a U.S. citizen, because they've been in line through the process for years? That's a problem. They don't swallow that one. When they've been following the procedure before this open border situation, and now the situation is not happening. Putting them in the back burner.
They have a chance at legal citizenship. The other people don't.
Why don't they go illegal?
Yeah, but 10 years from this.
The amount of time it takes, I think.
They judged my family when they came from Cuba. They told me, hey, this is the process. Why aren't they doing the process? Why are they jumping over fences? Why are they cheating at $2,500 per day as opposed to $10,000? These are all games being played. You can't see the sound in this country. And hunger is not one of them. Hunger's not one of them. Hold on a second. Hunger's not one of them.
I'd like to state again, I'd like to make very clear for everybody here
I love this.
that the situation of us helping the immigrants has nothing to do with politics.
100% agree.
Okay, we're Catholic, we're supposed to do that, and I commend them to do it. However, it's hard to follow and understanding sometimes for this procedure to continue, and sometimes we tend to mix one with the other. So if our expressions are bringing that up, has nothing against you or your job or the feeling.
I kind of love a good conversation.
Bueno, yo me voy a parar también porque soy más chiquito que él y para que vea. ¿Ok? Miren, yo creo que el problema aquí un poquito es que es un tópico que se ha politizado demasiado.